Lily Orchard loves to rewrite history. Indeed, it's something she's been doing for so long that it seems to have become second nature by this point, and today's topic is no exception. I speak of course of Lily Orchard's Stockholm series, how she denies she ever wrote it, and the mountain of evidence that proves she's lying to her audience. Though before we can get around to that, I just need to give a content warning for the following: sexualization of minors, sexual abuse apologia, mentions of incest, coercion, dead names in archived documents, and gaslighting. If you like our work and appreciate the research put into each video, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon. You can also support us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media. Hi there, my name's Ethel Thurston, and we're here today to talk about the evidence, both old and new, that Lily Orchard wrote the My Little Pony fanfic, Stockholm, a piece which not only sexualizes minors in a way that is intended to be gratifying, but also contains real-life arguments in support of child rape. We'll also be discussing Lily's latest argument, how it was already debunked before she made it, and why that seems to display a degree of desperation in her recent actions. This video is the most recent in a series of exposés centered on Lily Orchard. Our first video shared archived evidence of Lily Orchard publicly encouraging then-friend, Josh Scorcher, to groom Inkros, who was a minor at the time, which he ultimately did. We then followed this up with Glazed victim testimony, along with an explanation of how Lily targets particularly vulnerable youth, luring them into a hypersexualized environment as a means to desensitize them to her sexual appetite. This was then followed by Mackenzie's victim testimony, which included a more detailed breakdown of parasocial audience grooming, how it mirrors targeted grooming, and discussion on why we need to prioritize a victim-led approach in our advocacy. Lastly, we published a video debunking Lily's defenses thus far, whilst also exploring the ways Lily utilizes anti-black racism and transmisogyny to attack her critics. So do check those videos out. With that noted, let's start with a recap of what Stockholm is in order to understand why it's so important. Stockholm is a series of fanfics written by Lily Orchard and Nintendo Gal 55, consisting of Stockholm, the first fanfic, followed by Valentine's Day, Twicentia, Limits, both parts 1 and 2, The Razzle Dazzle, The Dash Family, The Littlest Dazzle, and lastly, Illicit Disco, all of which were published during 2014 and 2015. The series is a mashup of Lily's other writing project, Tale of the Valkyrie, and Hasbro's My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, with many of its characters taken from the MLP show. However, the one we're interested in is Stockholm the original. The fanfic largely follows three groups. We have Fluttershy and Intersex Rainbow Dash, we have Essentia, yes, that Essentia, and Twilight Sparkle, and lastly we have the Cutie Mark Crusaders, the CMC, consisting of Scootaloo, Sweetie Belle, and Apple Bloom, originally introduced as preteens, so 9 to 12 years of age, before being aged up to 13 and later 14. This is in spite of the fact that the events of the fanfic seem to take place over a span of a few months. This will become important later. The fanfic follows Shy and Dash as Shy leaves her current relationship to be with Dash, Essentia and Twilight as they try for a child in spite of Twilight being incredibly abusive, and the CMC as they begin their sexual exploration. And yeah, you can probably see where this is going. To be clear, I'm not going to cover the entire thing, nor is this our detailed literary analysis of said piece. I just want to summarize 6 chapters to give you a general idea of the nature of the fanfic and why it is as controversial as it is. Chapter 7, Dateless When We Turn 16, has Apple Bloom and Sweetie Belle talk about having sex around Dash, who offers them her bed as she and Fly leave the house. We then get an extremely graphic description of the girls, who, reminder, are 14, having sex. Sweetie Belle then tells Apple Bloom that she gets aroused when she sees her sister naked, because of course, this wouldn't be a Lily Orchard piece without incest. When Dash and Fly return, Dash realizes she's recorded the pair having sex, so, due to fears of being imprisoned, formats the drive. That's when Sweetie Belle comes down and hugs Dash, only to be prodded by Dash's erection. Lily has Sweetie Belle apologize to Dash, Dash talks about how lesbians don't tend to like women with penises, and Sweetie Belle tells Dash to give her and Apple Bloom a call if Dash is still dateless when the pair turns 16. Chapter 7 ends with Dash discovering Sweetie Belle's underwear along with an accompanying note written by her, offering said underwear as a token of appreciation, which Dash ultimately keeps. Chapter 14, what I call Double Dash, has the CMC board trying to figure out what they should do, and since this is a Lily Orchard fanfic, the solution involves the three of them going back to their hideout, forming a polycule, and having a threesome. They then head over to Dash's house and tell her about what happened, at which point Lily has Dash make a joke about drugging the three of them. Scootaloo discovers that Dash is into sex and goes on to laud her as the ultimate lesbian fantasy, as Dash lets the three know that they're welcome in her house anytime. Sweetie Belle then tells the other CMC members to leave their underwear behind as a token for Dash, only to let slip that Dash fantasizes about raping them. This results in both Apple Bloom and Scootaloo feeling uncomfortable, particularly Scootaloo, who is currently in the process of being adopted by Dash, yet Sweetie Belle calms them down. Dash then graphically fantasizes about raping Scootaloo whilst having Shy join in, with Scootaloo calling Shy her mummy. Chapter 20, Sweetheart, Come Down Here, is the chapter in which Lily writes Sweetie Belle to be the one making a move on Dash, leading Dash to reach for emergency pills that apparently turn off a person's sex drive. This is also the chapter in which Dash molests Scootaloo following her breakup with Shy, which, speaks for itself. Yet it's chapter 21, Want to Talk, that really takes things a step further in how fucked up this entire thing is. After Scootaloo tells the CMC about what happened, not only do they brush off what was done to her as a non-issue, but Apple Bloom and Sweetie Belle proceed to pressure Scootaloo into having sex with them to make up for her almost cheating on them. Because she was molested. I think I said it best in my notes when I wrote, fucking shoot me. Though, not to worry, Scootaloo isn't the only one being blamed, with Scootaloo telling Shy that it's her fault for leaving, and Sweetie Belle being made to wear trousers to stop her from tempting Dash. Notice the displacement of blame going on? It's not very subtle. Shy and the CMC then turn up at Dash's house to discover that, out of nowhere, Dash and Essentia are having a brawl, a fact that will also become relevant later. Twilight turns up, gives a big lecture, and Dash is institutionalized. Chapter 22, with your insignia on it, the second to last chapter, has everyone doubting their decisions. Scootaloo is not shown to have been harmed in any way and just wants to be around Dash, who is allowed physical contact with Scootaloo. In fact, Lily goes so far as to have Scootaloo be the one to defend Dash's actions. One of the key themes is Shy feeling that she was a fair weather friend for not sticking it out with Dash to the very end, with everyone blaming her breakup with Dash for what Dash did to Scootaloo. Hey, could you imagine believing that someone breaking up with you gave you a free pass on your own terrible behaviour? Now where have I heard that before? Said narrative is carried over into chapter 23, Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. Twilight's abuse is given a pardon by a professional because it's apparently what Essentia has come to expect from life and she should therefore keep indulging in it. Sweetie Belle is further punished for the actions of a child predator, and the fanfic ends with a very ham-fisted letter by Twilight to Princess Celestia, closing with, I've learned, I think we all have, that to truly be with someone, you have to take the good with the bad. Don't be a fair weather friend. Take the one you love at their best and worst, or not at all. Your former student, Twilight Sparkle. Now, if you've watched the MLP series, you know that Twilight's letters are the summary of whichever moral lesson has been learnt throughout the episode. Considering this alongside Shy's own feelings in the previous chapter, and the overall message of Lily's fanfic is laid out quite literally in black and white. To report someone who has sexually assaulted a minor makes you a fair weather friend. That is Lily's main moral lesson to the reader, that you should enable someone who abuses children. Do note that this is a very condensed summary, We haven't even touched on Dr. Scorcher's pseudoscientific justifications for pedophilia, the way Lily blames said feelings on the presence of a penis, or who exactly Rainbow Dash is meant to represent, though I imagine many of you have some thoughts on that. But returning to what we've covered, there are central themes to note, namely the many ways in which Lily presents child molestation as often being child-led and harmless. Like a Catholic priest arguing that the choir boy came onto him, everything Lily writes in Stockholm is intended to deflect responsibility from Rainbow Dash onto her victims. We also see straight-up rape apologetics in other forms, as can be seen in Chapter 8 when Essentia tells Rainbow Dash that the age of consent in the region is 14. This is a real-life argument I have seen people make, attempting to justify child rape on the basis that it's legal in certain countries. This, by the way, is why I fundamentally reject a legalist argument and position. Laws are as flawed as the people who make them, and if you're treating said laws as an authority, you have no place in this conversation. This section is a big part of why I said the brawl at the end of Stockholm comes out of nowhere. Throughout the fanfic, Essentia is shown to be supportive of Dash until we reach the end, at which point she has a dramatic shift in character. Now, there's a variety of explanations for this, the simplest being Lily's poor writing, though it's also possible that Lily included said brawl so that she could use it to pretend like she didn't support pedophilia, whilst ignoring how the final chapter undermines any such pretense. This also seems to be why Lily aged up the CMC from preteens to 14-year-olds, specifically so she could use Essentia to make this argument. It would be far more difficult to convince people of said legalist argument if the CMC were 9-year-olds, so aging them up, but forgetting to go back and properly edit said ages, seems to have been Lily's way of maximizing her chances. Because the content Lily puts out has a direct impact on her audience's perceptions, minors included. Take Mackenzie for example, one of Lily's victims who was a minor at the time. In their testimony they discussed how Lily's work and general behaviour desensitized them towards sexual interactions between minors and adults, disarming their defences and enabling Lily to sex them. All because they've been led to perceive such interactions as normal due to what Lily posts, and they note the existence of Stockholm among the materials Lily put out. So this isn't hypothetical, we have real life victims that this sort of rhetoric and general exposure has worked on. A fact worth keeping in mind throughout all of this. It isn't just a fanfic, it's a propaganda piece, materials designed to influence the perceptions of the reader. Returning to Essentia, I found myself feeling extremely disturbed once I learned of her history in Stockholm. Whenever I saw her in later writings or other works, all I could see was the woman Lily wrote as a mouthpiece for literal child rape apologia, and I don't think this connection is lost on Lily, given that she created the character in the first place. And yet, Lily has continued to use Essentia as recently as July of 2021. Which is something I think demonstrates that any attempts by Lily to distance herself from Stockholm over the years, as we'll see in a second, doesn't stem from a sense of guilt, but rather pragmatism. Lily was perfectly comfortable with continuing to use a character for almost a decade who openly attempted to justify child rape, only phasing her out as more people began discussing the evidence surrounding Stockholm to a wider audience. The last general thing I want to note is that the sex scenes between minors or minors and adults are written no differently to scenes between adults. That is to say that they are written to be sexually gratifying for the reader. To give you a specific example of what I mean, during both the bedroom scene between Sweetie Belle and Applebloom and the group's later threesome, Lily goes so far as to describe what the girl's genitals taste like. This is not a piece that alludes to child sexuality in a fade out to black kind of way, which Lily does use in other places throughout Stockholm, so she knows how to do so, nor is it a piece that touches on the horrors of child rape by focusing on the terror and harm caused by Dash's actions. Stockholm and its scenes involving minors are meant to be sexually gratifying. That is Stockholm's purpose, as designed by Lily. Which, as you can probably imagine, created a number of problems for Lily as she began rebranding herself as the saviour of child victims of abuse. Because reminder, that is why we are here. That is how she's gone on to present herself, which is fucking dangerous, considering Lily's true nature. Suffice to say, in the years leading up to her work on Toon Critic and the deluge of paedophilia content in the pony community in general, Lily began downplaying her part in Stockholm, even deleting certain pieces as early as August of 2015. Though she wasn't entirely done with the series, as seen in this Q&A between Ali the Alicorn and Lily, with Ali asking Lily questions about her work and then reblogging Lily's answers, which mentioned Stockholm on the 29th of December 2016. Lily also talked openly about rewriting Stockholm as late as May of 2016, so the history surrounding said series clearly wasn't a complete deterrent. However, the original fanfics would re-emerge during the Lily-Josh schism of 2018, with Josh calling upon Stockholm as a means of attacking Lily. This is what became the tipping point, with Lily now flat out denying the existence of said piece as seen in her response to Josh's accusations.
But the reality is that this will most definitely be fought, especially since Josh has actually tried to defame me numerous times, going as far as to distribute child pornography on Twitter that he grabbed from likely any random story off fanfiction and claiming Lily made that, trust me.
Suffice to say, Lily and her supporters have attempted to make a number of excuses for Stockholm over the years, with said arguments falling into three general categories, which are 1. Lily Orchard wrote Stockholm as is, and it was her co-author, Nintendo Gal 55, who pressured Lily to include sections sexualizing minors. 2. Lily Orchard wrote a version of Stockholm lacking the sections sexualizing minors, with said sections being added later by her critics. 3. Lily Orchard didn't write Stockholm. I tend to find that Lily fans who have been with her longer are more likely to make the first two arguments, whilst newer fans are more likely to make the third. This is likely the result of Lily going all out on the idea that she never wrote Stockholm in recent years, something that's just accepted as gospel by her newer audience members. So with that laid out, I'd just like to go through these one by one in reverse order, starting of course with the argument that Lily didn't write Stockholm, period. Now, we've already seen some evidence that this is false in the post reblogged by Ali the Alicorn, and indeed, if you search her page for Stockholm, you find a wealth of other examples confirming that yes, Lily did indeed write Stockholm. Yet this is by no means the only evidence that exists, as can be seen in this clip taken from Lily's 2014 Halloween Glass of Water special, The Grandmother of Grimdark.
When I started this series, I had every intention on doing something special for Halloween, and nothing could be better than taking a truly bizarre and messed up fanfic and picking through it like an amphetamine-fueled chimp. But which one? There's so many. Fallout Equestria? That's too long. Fall of Equestria? No. Equestrian Pony Meat Business? I think I'll break my rating limits. Can't do Stockholm, I wrote that one. But then I thought, what about that one, Jerry? The one that started this whole trend of grimdark fanfiction. Can't do Stockholm, I wrote that one. Can't do Stockholm, I wrote that one. Can't do Stockholm, I wrote that one.
We then have Lily's Glass of Water episode, Mummy Daggio equals Alicorns, which originally aired on the 24th of May 2015, during which Lily boasts about her ability to write characters whilst displaying images of both Stockholm the Razzle Dazzle and Stockholm the Dash family on screen, at two separate points in the video.
As a writer of both original fiction and fanfiction, I have a habit of always using OCs. I created a character that ended up being paired with Twilight, still wasn't called a Mary Sue. There's an alternate version of her that's a bigger boobie than Fluttershy, still wasn't called a Mary Sue.
So we can say with confidence that Lily Orchard wrote Stockholm, a fact that makes her new argument in her 2022 Accusations Master post seem all the more desperate. For you see, in spite of us playing what I just showed you in the Mackenzie video, which was published on the 15th of October, Lily still went on to deny that she ever wrote Stockholm in her Accusations Master post published on the 27th of October. She just did so in a more roundabout manner than straight up denying any involvement, asserting, "This references an old fanfic called Scars that skewered and condemned the brony fandom's romanticizing of abuse and their excusing of pedophilia. Was hosted on G Drive and then angry bronies edited it to have underage sex scenes into it and reposted it to their sites under the name Stockholm, using the same tactics they developed harassing a teenage girl for not liking their Rapist Celestia comic. Scars was written in 2012, discarded and disowned in 2014, and rebooted in 2018 to be an original story about trauma." Except, as we've all just heard, Lily specifically refers to Stockholm as Stockholm, doing so as late as November of 2016, by which point this hate campaign had apparently been running for 2 years. So the fact that Lily would continue to make this argument, in spite of it having already been thoroughly debunked by this point, really goes to show both her desperation and just how little she thinks of her audience. And if you're a fan of Lily's and you're watching this, surely a part of you has to be insulted at just how much of a sucker Lily is attempting to take you for, to assume that you'll never check things for yourself, that you'll just shut up and listen to her without question. I'd be fucking pissed if someone like Lily treated me like that. But I guess that requires a person to have self-respect. So I guess the question is, do you have self-respect? Moving on to Lily's argument that Stockholm has been edited by her critics, it's easy to respond to this by pointing out that the Stockholm series archived on FilmFetch, which is kinda like archive.com but for film fiction, is archived under Lily's name. However, it's just as easy for Lily to assert that said account was fake, therefore we need to verify the integrity of these fanfics, and to do that we turn to Lily's film fiction account. Though first, a little history lesson. Lily has gone by many usernames over the past decade. Barspawn, Deadname Pete, and Lily Pete among them. These names can be verified by going to any of Lily's videos, copying the URL, and pasting it into a tag extractor, since Lily herself continues to use said names in her tags. This is important since Lily's fanfiction has existed under all three names at different points in time. Now, how can I say for certain that these accounts are all hers? Well, thankfully FilmFiction has a 2-tier ID system, meaning that besides usernames, which the user can change at any time, each account comes with a unique user ID which can't be changed. What's more is, the stories page on FilmFiction uses this unique user ID to keep track of the user's stories. This means that, were I to, say, find a link to Barspawn's official FilmFiction account on Lily's 2012 MLP fan label wiki page, long before she'd met any of her so-called stalkers, I could simply plug that into archive.com, open up the older save, and then click the Stories tab to see that Lily's user ID on FilmFiction is 3624. This then acts as a tether, allowing us to click the Stories tab at any point throughout the account's history to verify that what we're looking at is indeed her account. 3624 is effectively Lily's FilmFiction fingerprint, unique to her, impossible to fake, and thus offering a strong degree of credibility. All three accounts check out, linking back to user ID 3624. With that established, the Stockholm series, as shown on FilmFetch, would have been posted sometime during Lily's dead name period, and indeed, we can see Stockholm being presented as her cream of the crop around this time. Sadly, there's no archive copy of Lily's stories page from this period, and even if there were, I doubt they show up, since in order to see mature content on FilmFiction, you need to enable it via your personal settings, something archive.com sadly doesn't allow. But then I remembered something I noticed whilst browsing Lily's abandoned account. You see, fanfiction has these things called bookshelves, which are effectively its equivalent of YouTube's playlists that can be found on the user's library page. And it was on said page that I noticed that, whilst Lily was very quick to delete her Stockholm fanfics, one thing she forgot to do was delete her Stockholm bookshelf. What this means is, whilst empty, it remains a visual reminder of what was once there, something that made me chuckle at the time. But this got me thinking, is it possible that someone captured an archived copy of said bookshelf? Well, sure enough, there it was, providing a partial list with links leading to individual pages of said fanfics. Sadly, the links themselves don't work when you click them. Instead, you get taken to this error page, though I was able to figure out why rather quickly. For some reason, the spaces on either side of the hyphen found between Stockholm and the rest of the fanfic's title were replaced with additional hyphens, meaning that if we remove the 2 additional hyphens before pressing enter, the links now work as they should. However, since we've now edited the URL, we need to click the Stories tab just to make sure we're still on the same account. Yup, still user ID 3624. Lily Orchard. And you can check this for yourself using the instructions I'm giving you. Don't take my word on it any more than you should take Lily's. That's why we reference everything we put out, so you can check these things for yourself. Though it's here we run into another problem, in that the original Stockholm isn't listed at the time the snapshot was taken, because no, the Dash family isn't the first Stockholm, meaning we have no link. Thankfully, each fanfic on Fanfiction has a unique content ID number in its URL, just like YouTube. What's more is, that content ID number is the same as the one used on FimFetch. That's to say, the Dash's family content ID number, which is 177564 on Fanfiction, is the same on FimFetch, appearing again as 177564. The same is true of Illicit Disco, which is 259794, and Razzle Dazzle, which is 246238. Nobody bothered to archive the Littlest Dazzle. What this all means is that we can take the Stockholm URL from FimFetch and reverse engineer it to get the Fanfiction URL, plug that into archive.com, and wouldn't you know it, it works. All that's left to do now is click the Stories tab to ensure that it's the right user ID, and there you have it. User ID 3624, aka Lily Orchard. This is why I am happy to declare with absolute certainty that the copy of Stockholm found on FimFetch, the copy I read and gave you a recap of at the beginning, is the original Stockholm as written and uploaded by Lily Orchard. There were no trolls, there was no conspiracy, just one woman's lies to avoid accountability. That means all we're left with is the argument that Lily was pressured by her co-author, Nintendo Gal 55, into including scenes sexualizing minors. This is perhaps the most difficult argument to debunk, since it's very difficult to know the dynamic Lily and NG55 had. We can't really tell what happened behind the curtain. That's why I had originally intended to approach this argument by building a character profile, supplying evidence of Lily's distribution of non-photographic depictions of child sexual abuse. Because when we consider those actions, this idea that Lily was uncomfortable with said scenes and was being forced to go along with them doesn't make a whole lot of sense. However, I've recently been shown evidence that makes this entirely unnecessary, meaning we can save that one for another video. The evidence I was shown recently came in the form of a 2014 post in which Tumblr user Valkyrie Studios responds to an anonymous question asking how they intend to keep Flutterdash out of the story they're currently writing with NG55, stating, "You're talking to the guy who managed to convince her that writing Twilight as a rapist and Rainbow as a pedophile would have been a good idea. I think I can manage this." To which NG55 reblogged, adding her own response stating, "Ha, Not a chance in hell, bucko. So who is Valkyr Studios? Well, thankfully Nintendo Gal 55 was nice enough to reblog their Patreon, which uses Lily's dead name by the way, meaning that if we click the link, it directs us to Lily's Patreon. Indeed, if you've ever been on Lily's Patreon, you might have even seen that, besides the user ID number, Lily's personalized URL is Valkyr Studios. That's why if you click on the Patreon links below her videos, they will take you to said URL. This is also likely why Lily hasn't changed said URL, because doing so would mess up all the links she's put out so far, and she needs that cash. Yet we can take things a step further in returning to Nintendo Gal 55's blog post. By removing the deactivated account prompt after the hyphen, we can get the URL to said deactivated Tumblr. Then we just have to plug it into the Internet Archive, and oh look, wouldn't you know it, it's Lily's old account. It even has the same layout as the one she was using until September of this year. Valkyr Studios is Lily Orchard, meaning Lily Orchard not only admitted to, but boasted about, being the person who pressured Nintendo Gal 55 into making Rainbow Dash a child predator. Ergo, there is absolutely no reason to believe that Nintendo Gal 55 pressured Lily into including scenes sexualizing minors. Indeed, all evidence stands to the contrary. And with that demonstrated, that means Lily's excuses regarding Stockholm have been debunked. And it's important to note that most of this information has already been shared at various points on Tumblr. Because while some things, like using the user ID on Fanfiction to verify which accounts are genuinely Lily's and thus authenticate the available copies of Stockholm as original, were developed by me, everything else, the video clips, the content ID of the fanfics on Fanfiction, even the post involving Nintendo Gal 55, have been shared previously. And considering just how much Lily has riding on this and how people feed information back to her, there is no way she doesn't know all of this. So Lily has just been openly lying to her audience for years in a desperate bid to bury the materials she created to defend and glorify child molestation. And it's my hopes that videos like these strip her of that ability. Though it doesn't end there. For you see, as I was rooting around, I came across a rather disturbing post in which Nintendo Gal 55 stated that something Lily had written involving the CMC post-Stockholm was painful to read, almost bringing her to tears in the process. Keeping in mind that NG55 describes the worst of how she felt reading Stockholm, the very same fanfic I described near the beginning, as sad, one has to wonder just what Lily made her read. What's more is, whilst Nintendo Gal 55 says Lily respected her wishes in changing said piece, it's worth mentioning that Lily would later kick her off the team for creative differences. This is another one of those patterns seen with how Lily treats the people whose labour she exploits, most often, though not always, her partners. Lily has a history of increasing the pressure over time, chipping away at their defences until they give Lily what she wants, discarding them the very moment they become too much trouble. She not only did this with Nintendo Gal 55, but also Lizzie, Brittany, and Patch. There's also speculation that something similar might have occurred regarding Ginger more recently. Keep in mind that all of these people were her former fans who wanted to do nothing more than impress their hero. And you see the power she has. Power she exploits to erode boundaries. It is both vindicating and yet harrowing to come across evidence of Lily behaving in ways we and others have noted whilst researching something entirely different. Because once you begin to build an understanding of Lily and her patterns, you quickly realize that there's no neat way to divide different aspects of her behavior. They all bleed into one another, which is why it's important to take a step back and look at the bigger picture now and then. And I just wanted to highlight that here, since these names are real people. People Lily has exploited, has pressured into doing things they're not comfortable with. Lily systematically tests her victims' defenses for weaknesses, backing off now and then to lure them into a false sense of security, before getting right back on it. She's insatiable, and I'm glad these people were able to get away. Because there is hope in this. If people who have previously been friends or even partners with Lily can come around and see her for what she is, so can everyone else. And that's worth keeping in mind as we go forward. Speaking of going forward, we will of course be picking things up in the next video to discuss the recently discovered video evidence of Lily Orchard distributing non-photographic depictions of child sexual abuse. So do keep an eye out for that. If you spotted something we failed to comment on, do be sure to let us know down below. I do read every comment and always appreciate hearing your thoughts on the matter, and if you appreciate what we do here and want to help out, please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make all this possible. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Gert Van Voorst, Hannah Banghart, Sosh Daniels, Flynn, and Higgins the Seagull. And for myself, Adita, and Levi, take care now.